Call to order the meeting of the CTAC for January 2023, the future. Can we please have a roll call and determination of the quorum?
Yes. Matt Moreau?
Here.
Mayor Banks? Brett Bierce?
Here.
Joe Burrito?
Here.
John Castellarian?
Okay.
Is that John?
I think that was Joe.
Yeah, I thought. Justin Chenault? Jacob Clay? Jennifer Combs? Micah Cunningham? Patricia Incarnation? Rupert Farley?
Here.
Glenn Goldsmith? Larry Gross?
Here.
Aaron Hayes?
Here.
Michael Holt? Sorry. Travis King? Nick Wanoski? David McLaughlin? And Paul Bokar?
Here.
Ken Progue? James Powell?
Here.
Justin Savage? Rodney Thomas? And I know that this is not today, but wait, no.
Morgan Birch.
Morgan Burns, but yeah. All right, Mr. Chair, we have a quorum.
All right, great to hear. At this time, I can entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
This is Rupert Farley, so move.
Moved. Is there a second? Second. Any discussion?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. All right, so the meeting minutes from the November meeting were not hyperlinked in the email that you got, but they are printed out here. We can either bump this to the next meeting to have reasonable time to look at the minutes. Motion from Rupert to approve the minutes from November. Is there a second?
Second.
Second, and who did the second? I can't tell on over the phone.
Actually, I'm going to withdraw the second. I thought it was a motion to move the minutes for next meeting.
No, this is the meeting minutes from the November 2022 meeting.
I'll second.
All right, second. Discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Public comment. Comments and questions from members of the public are welcome at this time. Staff will also read comments submitted by the public prior to the meeting. Do we have anybody from the public that would like to make a public statement?
I'll take one.
Go ahead.
Rosalind Reader, I live in Village Celebrate. I wanted to pass on that, I talked to my neighbors, there's some confusion about the way the questions on the survey are. Questions specific, so it seems like the answers are just asking under the survey. For example, when it's number 3 says, do you support a new river crossing? Okay, does that mean yes, any river crossing bridge that might come up, or does that mean specifically the one that was in the study? Not sure how to take that. Because they might like a crossing, but not that particular one. Number 4 says, should the region invest in development of a new I-95 interchange? And then it gives the 4 choices. So it seemed when I was at the Monday meeting that they were lumping the first 3 choices together to say if you chose A, B, or both, then that meant a yes. And whereas someone might want this one, but not that one. So we weren't sure if they were going to be lumped together as yeses or not. So we just wanted to pass that on.
All right. Appreciate it. Thank you very much. Does anybody else have a public comment? That's in memory. Do we have anybody online that wants to make a public comment?
Just members that are online.
Okay. Do we have any correspondence?
Yes, so we received quite a number of correspondence in relation to the survey, and those will all be compiled and read aloud during the policy committee meeting, which is has the public hearing on not this coming Monday because that's Martin Luther King Jr. Day, but the following Monday. So January 23rd at 7:30 p.m. will be the public hearing, and it'll have all the comments related to this report. And I didn't create them today because, or compile them today for you all because public hearing is specifically for that. So I can link it next time to the whatever you want to.
Sure. Maybe when it is compiled, because not everyone attends the policy committee
Right.
meeting, could you just blast it out to the CTAC membership?
Yep, I can.
Cool. Okay. Any other public correspondence that not related to that? Okay. Okay. All right. Moving on to the next item, new business and action items.
Okay. So first up, we have the East-West Mobility Study Roadway Study component. Please bear with me. I am going to be kind of giving a synopsis of a presentation that was given to Policy Committee the last time around. You can go online and see the full report. This is the part that we are currently accepting public comment for. And we are within our 60-day public comment that the Policy Committee have opened. So please, if you have not gone to the FAMPO website and taken our survey, please do so. If you have time and would like to kind of do a deep dive into the document and provide additional written comments, please do so. I'm going to give you basically the highlight from the consultants item. So Coley, could you pull up the draft VHB, the consultants mobility study? So this is the East-West Mobility Study Phase 2, the draft roadway reports. So the second phase was broken up into two kind of different segments. There's a transit report previously reviewed and presented, and that was ultimately adopted as official FAMPO document at the last policy meeting. This is the next stage. Next slide, please. So in the previous rounds, phase 1 identified 13 east-west corridors. They're particularly looking at peak PM congestion and trying to say, okay, if we build out everything that we have on our plans, what is the future kind of congestion and landscape going to look at? Because there's a very long lead up time to get a lot of the transportation projects funded. And what are the potential treatments that we can start identifying and actually slowly building out a case to either identify funding or take it through to construction? Trying to think, although this is a roadway report, there are actually bicycle and pedestrian connections being proposed, as well as identifying additional treatments for other items. So we can go to the next slide.
Quick question real quick. So for phase 1, it said there was 13 different projects. And I'm trying to remember from the policy committee meeting, I think it was when they're looking at it, they're looking at the level of service that would be in the future. So it's not as it is right now, it's with some assumed.
Correct. And I can kind of walk through those.
Okay.
So what they're looking at is looking at projected congestion into the future. They're identifying either large arterial roads or connectors that had very specific volume to capacity ratios. So they're looking to say, okay, what roadways are we going to start feeling more and more congested in the future? So they kind of developed what was going to be extreme congestion. So anything above capacity. So if a roadway has more vehicles on it than it has design capacity, it would be over capacity. As well as you're approaching that number 1 capacity, every single small addition to traffic volume gets felt a little bit more. So when you're at lower volume capacities, a few hundred cars here and there probably won't make a big difference. But as you're reaching capacity, it slowly becomes something that you start feeling it more and more as light cycles might not clear through as easily, particularly during peak rush hours. So they identified kind of those criteria. Next slide, please. No. And they picked these 13 corridors. Now, as they were going on for a future analysis, they were also kind of talking with the citizens groups, policy committees, and a few of these other roads. And so I believe that initially Enon Road wasn't on this 13, and Stafford County staff and whatnot swapped it back on. We'll get back onto Butler Road, which you'll see eventually kind of disappear from the analysis, because although it's identified as having potential congestion, within our current plans is a expectation that it will be widened to a 4-lane facility instead of a 2-lane facility. So actually, in the future, would no longer be kind of a congested, restricted network on it. So you'll see some of the movements happening. So
Yeah, I remember that was one of the issues that came up during policy committee. It's where it showed Butler as not a big problem, and everyone kind of put a red flag on that. But that was assuming it was
the model assumes that what is currently on our long range plan and is kind of scheduled to be built or improved will happen. If we do everything we say we need to do, okay, what are going to be the next items that we need to address? So next slide. So here are the corridors mapped out. As you can see, we are predominantly looking at east-west connections. And you can kind of see that there's a kind of a general trend that they kind of span 95 for that reason. And those were the routes that were generally being picked up, because the consultants traditionally said that as our roads were along the I-95 corridor in areas that generated traffic, such as commercial real estate areas that were particularly automobile dependent, that those areas we're going to see more and more congestion develop, particularly into the future, even if we currently build out all of our current transportation projects. Next slide, please. So kind of jumping ahead. So they actually took the peak PM volume to capacity ratio. So this would be peak evening rush hour. So there were some questions and concerns. Why didn't we use AM, whatnot? I can't speak for the consultant specifically, but my guess is that traditionally as traffic builds through the day, you have that PM peak and it's a little bit harder to work its way through versus AM where you kind of start from a very low demand and it kind of spikes rapidly. So that's my guess. Traditionally PM peaks tend to be worse than the AM. Not always. I think Garrisonville Road kind of noted that the AM is probably a little bit worse. So there are examples, but system-wide, generally, we kind of look at the PM peaks. And if you look at it, some of these are unequal. So just because one roadway, what was the best example? I mean, Garrisonville Road kind of shows a little bit of it, that one direction tends to be a little bit worse than the other. But there's a few examples where the eastbound, or depending on which way the traffic is flowing, is going to be worse than the other. So that's traditional when you expect from different traffic volumes in different directions at different points in time. So yeah, really anything about, I would say about 6.5, you start noticing a little bit more traffic, just how it feels. You say, okay, there's a little traffic's kind of picking up. As you approach 8, you're like, okay, this is getting congested. By 9, you're like, okay, this is heavy traffic, and then your blood pressure raises if it goes really that much more above 1. So just to give you kind of a feel for that. So we're seeing significant congestion along our east-west corridors. Next slide, please. So again, I kind of jumped ahead. They said that there's a large amount of congestion in auto-oriented commercial activity. We still see severe congestion even after we implement a lot of our projects. Some of the items that they're going to get into later on is that we can do some specific kind of spot treatments to very specific corridors, but we still see a regional congestion problem. So we're kind of doing small spot fixes, but we're really having a bigger picture item that we're struggling to contain. So next slide, please. So the recommended corridors and approach. So these consultants are taking a very high level. They're not quite getting down into the weeds over the true engineering. That's a later phase. They're going to come back and say, we get to pick our greatest hits and which ones would they like us to explore from more of an engineering level. So this remains kind of a high level. They're not really going in depth into design. They're not really looking at parcels or properties or the environmental costs. It's still kind of somewhat remote. They can give very broad stroke cost estimates of what they think, but those can kind of change as you dig down. So as they refine the various stages, they can kind of provide a few more details there. Route 3 continues to be kind of more of a bigger puzzle, kind of to solve Route 3 and some of the challenges it faces. I don't think they had really a whole lot specific that they want to address. It's just kind of news that that one's going to be a bigger challenge and probably needs more of a focus at a later point in time. So, okay, next slide. So they, when selecting kind of the treatments and options, they prioritize based on congestion benefit, as well as how complex would the solution tend to be. They didn't just look at one project in a bubble. They actually kind of bundled a few projects. They compared them if we did some and didn't do others. They kind of did a few kind of what if scenarios of how different projects could be tied together or not, or kept separate. But at some point in time when we're dealing with 13 times 13 in the infinite they probably didn't do them all, but they did do a few that they really saw that had more benefits as they worked through their process. So the three bundles they identified was one, kind of what the Stafford County kind of calls the Mine Road Extension, also known as the Western Network. They're looking for an opportunity to make a north-south connection. I know it's an east-west study, but hold on. North-south connection across Stafford County west of 95. They're looking at the potential of a river crossing and interchange between Stafford County and the city of Fredericksburg. And they looked at, okay, what type of widening of our current arterials do we need to do to kind of absorb some of that traffic congestion or minimize it as best they can within the confines of what they saw at that kind of 10,000 foot level. Slide. So the Western Network is kind of getting back to something that they find while they're doing the modeling work. So this is still an east-west study. Well, you know, I think most folks who have spent enough time in this area know that to go east-west, eventually you're going to have to go north-south in some ways. Route 3 kind of cuts across. Route 17 actually ends at Route 1, and then kind of through other little bits and networks kind of starts off in Spotsylvania going west again. So it's kind of not a true grid network. Things kind of condense. So in some cases, to go east and west in this region, there isn't necessarily the direct path. So what they're looking at here is that they modeled making various connections kind of west of 95, generally speaking, in Stafford County that would connect some of our east-west roads. And as a whole, on the regional network, they saw actually about a 10% change in congestion. So what does the 10% mean? They actually gave a great example. Does everybody know how bad traffic gets when the school system goes back in? 10% is that. That is exactly the difference. So summer vacation, school's back in session and everything gets crazy, at least for a little while, right? That's what that type of level is. They see a change in extreme congestion actually go up. So in that case, if there's the instances where like a road is truly shut down bad, like the truly bad connections, there's actually a little bit of an increase there. But they see big changes to truss flow road. That road becomes less of a north, south, east, west kind of congestion corridor on that one. They do kind of understand that there's some like property considerations and wetlands in that area. It's a moderately to fairly expensive project. It can kind of connect itself through existing roadway networks, but there would actually be some new road connections needed to be built. And I'm trying to think, I'm trying to see what that last little recommendation at the bottom is behind the text, but I'm blanking. Oh, and they're recommending aligning with Plantation Drive in the southern part. So that is the Western network that they're proposing to try to eliminate some of the congestion on east-west by making a north-south road. Next slide. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, connect Trustlow to Centerport via Plantation, extension link Centerport with Mine Road. So they're literally building that other road on the other side kind of to complement Route 1.
Where would you extend Plantation to?
Can we?
You said to Centerport, but I mean, you've got.
I think there's a couple of them. I think this is where we put Enon Road potentially as an option, or it would be a new facility basically from 17 to Centerport with Plantation.
Yeah, Centerport has that, like, if you're coming from 95, it has that sharp right curve that as you start to go up towards the FedEx and the Amazon. So it would connect to that and create a new T intersection or some sort of junction.
Can I ring in on this, please?
Go ahead.
Okay, I'm Joe Breeder. I regret that I was not able to go to the meeting. I'm out of town right now. But the Centerport to Plantation connection has been obsolete for a number of years. And I proposed a connection from Centerport to Berea Church Road that would have less of an impact. And unfortunately, that wasn't studied in the study. And I feel that it should be studied. Over 4,000 people want to see it studied. And so the problem is it does, Plantation doesn't line up with Enon. So not only do you have to straighten the road out, but you have Plantation Drive that has a number of intersections on it that's not going to be able to handle more traffic. There's already a high crash rate on Plantation. And if you make it from 2 lanes, actually it's 2 lanes with a center turn lane, if you change that to 4 lanes, then anybody that's turning left at those intersections would have to cross over 2 lanes instead of crossing over 1 lane. So I think it's less safe and it's going to be costly. I don't think the right of way for Plantation is wide enough, so they're going to have to come up with another plan. But with all those intersections, you're talking like 14 different intersections on Plantation. And I feel that it's not a good line up. But if you line it up with the Berea Church Road, there's only a few houses on there. I guess a couple of them would have to be condemned, but there's a lot less interference there. And I feel it's a better connection and it lines up with Celebrate Virginia Parkway. Their plan is to run Truslow Road, make that 4 lanes. And if you do that, you're going to wipe out a lot of houses. And I can't believe this study doesn't say that. I counted 82 parcels on just one side of Truslow, and I kind of zigzagged it to try to avoid the most houses. So you're going to have 82 parcels, so at least 50 houses would have to be condemned if you widen Truslow to 4 lanes. And you're talking a lot of different plats that have to be made up, and a lot of driveways are going to be coming out on the road, and it's not going to really be a safe 4-lane road. It needs to have more limited access. So I just don't feel that Truslow Road should be 4 lanes. Mountain View Road was connected to Enon Road at one time, but when they put the interchange in, they cut the connection out, and that's a big problem. So we need to connect we need to connect Centerport Parkway with 17, and if it's connected with Berea Church Road, it would solve a lot of problems. And I just feel that should be studied.
It's still in the Stafford County Comprehensive Plan to do an extension from Centerport Parkway down towards Truslow Road right now. So that the slight realignment where it kind of goes over to Plantation, that's a different thing there. But for it to come down to Enon and where it hooks into Truslow, that's currently in their comprehensive plan. They just redid their comprehensive plan last year. So
Yeah, but
that, at least for...
They didn't do a transportation study with it. The plan's been obsolete for 30 years. I mean,
well, it's still in their comp plan.
resolutions
I'm not
back
sure
in
what
the
to say about
80s.
their comp plan from last year. Anyway, anybody else? Okay.
All right, we can go to the next slide, please. So the new river crossing. So this was another item that came out from the consultants. I would like to say that there's two different things going on with the river crossing at this moment. I believe just before the consultants came to staff with this concept, Stafford County and the city of Fredericksburg requested FAMPO to do a river crossing study or an early kind of a scouting project. So this is actually completely, I would say, quasi-independent or developed independent of those two items. So the staff, FAMPO is actually further exploring this, but this was what the consultants VHP identified. So what they were noticing is that there's a high amount of volume from 17 that is either taking US Route 1 or I-95 to then access the Route 3 corridor. There is kind of a suggestion, what they call it is a reverse C movement. So if you're kind of coming down, you'll come down 17, come north-south on Route 195, and then back out Route 3. So they were saying that that was actually a significant bottleneck, particularly putting additional pressures on the road network in and around the 95 and Route 1 connections. So those who are going beyond that area were actually dealing with a lot of local traffic. So in their analysis with the FAMPO travel demand model, they saw adding a river crossing to reduce congestion within the region from about 10%. It actually has a very large reduction in extreme congestion. The roads that are the highest, see the highest impact are Warrington Road and Fall Hill. Route 3 does see a 1% increase in congestion, but I would just want to note that that is very much dependent on what section of Route 3 you're on. So parts of Route 3 that are close to the interstate see a reduction. Parts closer to Gordon Road see an increase. So there's a little bit of, not all roads experience the same amount at the same place. And Cowan Boulevard, they also show as a small increase as well. Obviously, if the concept to implement this was actually a fairly challenging project to do a river crossing. There's significant sensitive environmental considerations to do with a river crossing. And it would be a fairly costly project as well. So we're looking at something that would be well over $300 million to provide this access. So the consultants drew this line on a map. This is not a kind of a connection. They just needed something to put in their model that says, hey, you can drive from this area to this area. There's a potential roadway exists, but there's actually been no consideration within the consultants on actually developing the actual dotted line.
But this particular dotted line right here
Yeah.
does have the other dotted line that is the extension of Gordon Shelton to 95 and
Correct.
And an
That's
interchange
one,
there. So that is incorporated. Rupert?
You say that Fredericksburg asked for this project?
Asked for FAMPO to explore a river crossing with Stafford County.
And they're connecting Celebrate to Celebrate over at Carter Silver and further.
Make a connection west of 95 between Stafford County and the city of Fredericksburg.
So generally that, but not, they didn't say, well, it should be here or there. It could be within a range.
Yeah, like, I think it's been talked about over numerous years.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Decades.
Yeah, so
At what time it was a gondola?
connecting from Celebrate where the shops are right now across the river to where Wegmans is going into Carter. So, but I thought the north and southbound river crossing projects were supposed to mitigate that congestion on 17, improving the interchange there. Each of those projects also around $400 million, but that didn't mitigate it. So the southbound has been open now for a year, right?
It's going to mitigate current levels.
Okay, but not
What we're seeing is that we are going to build right back to capacity in short order. And the other item is, while it does make improvements, it's still funneling a lot of local traffic to basically the 95 corridor to make local trips across the river.
Okay.
So.
Yeah.
So was there a city council resolution?
There's a letter and statement from the city, yes. No, it was a formal statement by the city to the FAMPO administrator. This is
Kind of surprised to me because I was around when they first proposed, beltways around the city and they call them the Northwest Corridors. And one of the biggest objections coming from mainly city residents and the city officials was the Rappahannock River is like the last or like next to last river on the East Coast. It still looks like it did before European settlers found the continent. And that it's like a irreplaceable treasure. It's not to be screwed up on a bunch of bridges.
It'll still look like a river.
And, sorry, I didn't hear you. So I'm surprised that they would come out now, supporting, any interference with that, losing that resource. I thought that the consultants, when they consider it, put some kind of value on the loss of that aspect. I mean, instead of just analyzing how much it would cost in asphalt and how much it would reduce traffic, which is what they've been doing, what they do for a lot of projects actually, and completely blow off any consideration of losing a national treasure. That's they would go back and reconsider this. As a matter of fact, I would recommend that that we put a resolution for it. We would like them to reanalyze this project, but put a value on losing the river of like $100 billion. See if the cost benefit analysis works out in favor of congestion that way.
If I'm mischaracterizing this, correct me, but the impression I got from the city was that it was fairly non-committal, that they just wanted to know, okay, if we did this, what would it look like? And they may end up just confirming your feelings on that. So I think that's where they are on that right now. Do we know what the nature of that particular study is going to be? Like what?
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
So I can do that because I'm also leading it. So yes, so for example, the city is asking, so what is the economic considerations of it? What are the impacts on transportation? What is the impacts on the natural environment? So there's actually a bigger thing. This is just what the consultants, VHB for this project, for what they were scoped of doing, were asked to do. And it just happened to coincide with Stafford and the city asking FAMPO to do I would say a deeper dive, but it's still very much a planning level study of a river crossing and what are the potential hurdles and items that, say, the city or the Stafford County should consider in the future if it decides it wants to move forward with the project. So in some ways, yes, I mean, there have been a fair amount of kind of environmental considerations to both the view shed, runoff concerns, kind of habitat corridors, and a few other things, as well as we're kind of investigating as far as the FAMPO study, but the consultants were just looking at this and saying, if we make these conditions, this is what our transportation network will accommodate and the benefits or impacts that if it is built. So this is just saying, if there is a river crossing between this Stafford County and the city of Fredericksburg, that we're looking at this type of change within our overall transportation network, particularly for east-west considerations.
I'd like to chime in. I don't think Rupert is putting much value on reducing air pollution. The situation is people are using the backward C movement and have to drive further distances. And I calculated it out from many different aspects, but it averages out to about 3 miles per trip. So if we have a corridor, let's say it has 10,000 trips a day, and you reduce the driving time by 3 miles per vehicle on the average, that reduces 30,000 miles of driving per day and also reduces congestion on other areas. So it's a significant reduction in air pollution.
think we had some, was there someone else that had?
I just have my question. So you said that the location was not set in stone, but it's only to Fredericksburg. Has there been a bridge considered over like farther west, possibly?
So the current consideration was a Fredericksburg Stafford Bridge, just because it was those two localities that had asked for some sort of inquiry into, what it would take to do it, what would it look like, where could it be, what would the challenges be, what would the cost be. Stafford and Spotsylvania have not decided that they want to move forward on that. Rupert.
Well, just to set the record straight, Joe is kind of new to this committee, so he doesn't know that I'm the most outspoken one against air pollution. He's not considering the alternatives that I've been putting forward for many years. And that is having communities that are walkable instead of automobile dependent. So if you compare a walkable community on either side of the river that doesn't need to cross the river, that's what you should compare with this bridge, and not the 30,000 he's talking about. That's not the only two options. There are a lot of other options on the table. Unfortunately, they're not being considered, even though they said in the plan that they're considering things. I was noticing, like on page 12, they make a reference to other strategies. Other strategies. I haven't seen anything mentioned on here about the other strategies besides building these roads.
So we want to.
You know, on page 13, talk
We
about.
have a few petitions, but we also had the transit report that was just adopted in the previous round as a formal items.
Saying something was adopted, you were saying something was considered and rejected.
No, so this is the roadway study. So phase 2 is kind of broken up into two different kind of areas so that the consultants could kind of do it in kind of piecemeal, I would say, kind of resize it for their scope. But there was already a transit report that was presented and adopted by the policy committee at their last meeting.
I'm talking about the introductory remarks in this report. You're saying things like consider reducing the volume to capacity ratio. Not accommodating it, but reducing it, which is what I've been talking about here for years, is addressing the demand problem instead of trying to supply all the asphalt that everybody wants. So yeah, I think it's great that they're talking about, reducing the peak velocity and the other strategies. But that's just an introduction. When it came down to the nuts and bolts of what they studied, they blew it off. Well, I wasn't at the meeting. Maybe it was considered. But if it was considered, I don't see any evidence of it in writing. So it appears to me like the idea of reducing the demand for this asphalt is just being blown off, even though they're talking about, that they're going to do it at the beginning of the study.
Because in general, this study, it doesn't really take into account any improvements to transit, to any other intermodal strategies that you could have here. So this is generally an island on itself in terms of this is road expansion.
Yes.
This is just straight up road expansion. Because what you
Correct.
get out of this is you have to see the product of the study is how much more road do you have to build to accommodate an increase in cars at the rate of the increase that we have today. This is if you do nothing to improve transit.
I agree, that's what we got, but what
Yeah.
out of me is they start off this study by saying things like I mentioned. They got another one on page 13, other policy issues. They're going to study other policy issues to shift demand. Exactly like congestion pricing would do. I don't know of anything that would do that better than congestion pricing. And yet there's no mention of them even considering just congestion pricing for a minute. Now, if they wanted to go ahead and do a study that was strictly roads and blow off every other alternative, why don't they just start off the darn study by saying that's what we want to do? So what I'm griping about is the fact that they're saying they're going to study every possibility, or only put everything on the table, we want to study it, and then turn around and do the exact opposite and just study roads. It annoys me. tax dollars not being spent wisely here.
We hear you, Rupert. I think part of it is, that's why there was two reports, so the transit report and the roadway report. But I also think that maybe the consultants are thinking with this region's past in mind, maybe the history, and also what is likely to be adopted by policy board, policy committee.
The important thing, Rupert, is for you to put those comments in writing
Yes,
during the public comment period.
and we
Every one of
appreciate,
you that has an opinion needs to articulate it just as you have this evening.
exactly, and that's why there's, thanks, Becky. That's why on the survey, there is a question that says, in addition to widening roads, what other congestion managing options should the region look into? And that was specifically worded so we wouldn't get, a little bit of
And I'm not talking about
fight.
putting something in the box, I'm talking about writing paragraphs of what you think, and sending it to us, but not just filling out the survey.
Right, that's
All
definitely
those
helpful.
comments are valuable, including those that you brought up about the survey.
Anything else before we move on? Okay.
All right, let's jump to the next slide. Let's see what is next. I'll reference and say if you'd like to look at a specific treatment, you can reference the full report so you can see how they kind of got to their reductions. But that bridge and making different the combination of, I think that was the Western corridor along with the bridge, kind of created a pretty significant decrease in traffic and congestion. Next slide. So just because I know that this is going to go over well, so in addition to kind of their Western network, they looked at spot treatments that were going to widen east-west corridors. For example, to kind of accommodate the future growth and vehicle usage along those corridors, they were suggesting that Garrisonville Road would need to be widened to about 8 lanes. They are looking at using existing turn lanes and shoulders to make that possible. In general, for the region, this really doesn't do a whole lot to move the needle for reducing congestion. It just does a lot of congestion reduction on Garrisonville Road because there are more travel lanes. Cost is a little bit less than some of the previous projects that you've seen, $60 to $65 million is on the table. That's actually a moderate amount for road expansion. I do think I do believe that VDOT does own a significant amount of the right of way, so that was one thing that they noted. Next slide. Courthouse Road, again, widened to 6 lanes. It creates a congestion reduction because there's additional capacity. Cost is kind of in the middle range there. Next slide. Warrenton Road, convert right turn lanes to 3 lanes, and of course we'll see a moderate amount of congestion reduction with that recommendation. Next slide. Mills Drive, again, we're seeing a kind of a common thing to accommodate the future congestion, widen the lanes, so this will become from 2 lanes to 4 lanes. It has a congestion reduction, but again, it doesn't do a lot for the region. Continue. Next slide. So, are there any questions about those? I kind of went through them fairly quickly. Okay. Next slide. Again, we have additional road expansions, 4 lanes with Stefaniga to Shelton Shop Road. This is a smaller project, but it would reduce congestion on that roadway, but not for the region. Next slide. Cowan Boulevard, they actually highlighted as being a potential option to actually expand that to 6 lanes. It would be a reduction for that quarter, but not necessarily for the region. That one probably has higher property costs, but that was one of the things that they were saying to accommodate the traffic. We would be looking at that. Next slide. And then they also identified the Harrison Road interchange as being a potential project. And this would be a large one, and there's some other considerations to account for, but adding Harrison Road there, as well as I think the county also had other projects kind of leading up to it, that would be kind of a targeted project for some individuals. And this one's kind of bounced around in the models a few times as they've refined and addressed some things. You've seen like the benefits kind of fluctuate, but I think that's just an item as the model was getting refined, that the congestion reduction, it looked great in I think previous rounds, and then kind of the reduction decreased. Is that correct?
The point of the Harrison Road interchange, it has to come part and parcel with the 4-lane widening of.
Oh, that's correct. Yes.
From Salem Church left on, but also this is the project that provides the most congestion relief to Route 3.
Thank you.
Well, that includes increasing capacity on Salem Church.
No,
Going up to-
widening Harrison Road. Salem Church right now is 4-lane.
Okay.
11 is 4-lane. So it's you would have to widen Harrison Road from Salem 1 for this to work, the interchange to work. That is in their thoroughfare plan, and it was actually one of the EA bond projects. It's actually designed back in 2000 with the 2005 road bond referendum.
Okay, next slide, please. So also in this roadway report were pedestrian and bicycle projects identified. Next slide. So they looked at connecting Fall Hill Avenue and the Spotsylvania Town Center. They kind of drew a kind of a wide swath to identify potential alternative plans. Next slide. And the primary route that they identified would basically follow Carl D. Silver Parkway, kind of along that central commercial center, and roadway design, and cross Route 3. So it was kind of a way to expand and connect kind of a pedestrian activity, and that would probably kind of facilitate other uses also happening along in the Central Park area as well. It does have to kind of zigzag a little bit across Fall Hill and then at Cowan as well, to kind of just keep the alignment, but that was one of the projects they identified as a kind of a needed bike ped shared use path along that corridor. Next slide. It does need land from parking, so there's probably some land cost that would have to be addressed with this project. Next slide. So with the new connection from the Chatham Bridge, there's kind of a future concept to kind of extend the bike and pedestrian networks that's coming across of that. So you can go to the next slide, and it's going to be particularly connecting with Chatham Heights there, to extend the bike ped facility across Route 3 there, and then up Chatham Heights Road. Next slide. And with this treatment, there's also going to be a recommendation of doing some road reconfiguration. Right now it's a 4-lane, for the most part, undivided highway. Occasionally you have a little extra lanes here and there for turn lanes, and a lot of spots you do not. The traffic volumes are relatively low, particularly for a 4-lane facility. They were not seeing as much vehicular pressure as causing this roadway to kind of need that. And so if you go to the next slide, they're suggesting to reduce it to a 3-lane facility. It'll be a 1-lane for each direction with a center turn lane in the middle. In some other places, they would quietly call this a road diet. I don't know if that's a dirty term here, but that's kind of the more common national term. And what this will actually do is that As it stands, Chatham Heights Road right now is actually kind of almost functioning in that capacity, that if you have to make a left turn, you have to do it from the left travel lane. And so in a quasi default way, it's already functioning that well. And so that in a way to make the bike and pedestrian facility work, they would actually use the existing DOT right away and then provide kind of the shift in the lanes that would provide the space while still quietly, mostly actually keeping the same amount of roadway functionality through that area. Next slide. So this is the current cross section. As you can see, it's just a 4-lane with paint in the middle. It does have some sidewalk facilities around it. And if we go to the next slide, this is the recommendation. And typically of any roadway that's under about 20,000 vehicles a day and daily average traffic, it works pretty well. Starting in over 20 kind of doesn't work as well. 25 makes it kind of not so much, but I think Chatham is around 14,000 vehicles a day, if I remember correctly. So this kind of puts it kind of in the perfect zone for this type of treatment. So that was their recommendation for Chatham Heights. Next slide. And then they also identified specific crosswalk improvements on Courthouse Road. This was something that was requested specifically by Spotsylvania County staff to align with other projects. Next slide. And for the next steps. So they identified, I should say, start with public. No, you're good. I'm jumping ahead. That's my problem. So right now we're in the middle of our public outreach periods. So please, if you have comments on this document, please let us know. Based on the policy committee and public feedback, a final roadway report would be developed. So at this point in time, it's a draft. So if you want to come out and say, what are the other treatments? This is a good time to do it. And they're going to also take a select number of projects that they've identified here and as to say, okay, they're going to take it one more step further and start to do some kind of early engineering design work for this type of project, so that it'll start creating a process that would lead to hopefully being a project being competitive for a future round for funding approval. So it's kind of starting that process to say, okay, we've kind of done a little bit of study work. Let's do a little bit more homework and start developing to this something that can compete for funding from the smart scale process. So next slide. Yes.
Rupert.
You skipped the mall flyover.
The mall flyover.
In the packet that we had to review for this meeting, one of the projects was a flyover at the mall. Anybody else read the material?
I don't remember it immediately off.
Are we online to get for this information?
Yeah.
It's online. It's the same.
Yeah.
It's the same document.
Yeah, if you click the link in the agenda in the email.
It was under the bicycle and ped section, which is why I was going to ask about is why is a flyover in the bicycle and ped section?
Was this a bridge over Route 3 to connect the bike facility in Central Park to the mall?
Oh. There was a graphic of it.
Did they refer to it as a flyover, Rupert?
Yeah.
Well, can we just do a find in page
They
flyover?
didn't use the term flyover.
Oh, they didn't use, okay.
But yeah, what you would do if you're heading west.
Well, I mean, I would.
You have a flyover to get into the mall. Which make a left turn without having to stop for the traffic light like you do now. And
I don't remember seeing that in this right here.
On the bike fed portion here.
That's not it?
no, that's not it. No, that's the interstate. I'm not talking about the interstate at all. I'm talking about Route 3.
You're talking about Route 3 from the interstate, flyovers, Route 3 from the interstate going
No.
out into the
Flyover
county.
from Route 3 into the mall.
That's what I'm saying. Like you're coming from the interstate
Yes.
and you're going out into the county, but it's a flyover into the.
Yes,
Okay.
Yeah, it's
it was in the materials.
right, we're at the Fall Hill right now, so.
They were looking.
Well, that's good. They do reference Fredericksburg Small Area Plan 1. That was fairly recent. Okay.
What am I looking for here? I was looking for the graphic, that's easier to spot.
It's okay. I mean, I'm
Okay.
presenting consultants project. It's like presenting on somebody else's homework. It's a
Yeah.
challenge.
Rupert, if you find a flyover,
Yeah.
please
Yeah.
point it out for us, okay?
Yeah.
If you find
I
it.
find the flyover and I share with everybody, I'm violating all those.
Send it to me. I can
Yeah.
pass it along.
All right.
Graphics that are.
Yeah. That's Small Area Plan 1.
Whoa, there it is, the flyover.
Over.
So why didn't,
You're right, Rupert. This is from the Project Pipeline Corridor Study. And I believe what you are seeing is, this is for this movement.
Yeah, that's a movement you can't do now, because if you take a left at that intersection, you just go to the Burger King. You can't get to the mall from it, so that flies over it.
You're right, construct westbound left
Over.
into the town center from Route 3, close Mall Court. So I think if you go online and Google this, what Coley can do, we'll get the link to this pipeline corridor study. What you're reading there, I think is happening further back here. And there is a flyover proposed in this pipeline study.
what are you talking about back here? There's a picture of the flyover right there.
Well, I think what you're seeing is a portion of a study that's a long pipeline study. What I'm reading there is not this. So I believe when you see the entire pipeline study, it says correct westbound left flyover into Spotsylvania Town Center from Route 3 is not, I don't believe, at Mall Court. What I'm seeing here on this graphic, which is a portion of a longer study that goes out to Gordon Road. What I'm seeing here is a right turn. This is where the Burger King is.
No, it's.
No, the right turn is at ground level.
I'll show you.
Okay, that is a
It's a left turn. That is Ball Court, which is a dead end.
And this is a westbound lane and a fly.
That's the Burger King. That's the hotel. And so this connects to.
You're right, because that's
This
the
is over here behind the mic.
westbound flyover. Scroll up and see what context this graphic has for the pipeline study. Maybe go back up and see where figure 5 is referenced. Figure 5 displays the proposed intersection improvement for the ongoing project pipeline study.
Yeah, that's the flyover.
They're doing theirs.
They're referencing another study there.
Mhm.
You're right, Rupert. How you like that? On January, whatever it is?
All right, well, back to my original question.
All right. What was the question? What was the question?
Why was this skipped?
Probably intentional.
Why wasn't this part of your presentation?
It wasn't included in the VHB presentation to the policy committee. Like, this is a different study.
It's a different study.
Yeah.
It's been included.
Because they're referencing other studies. Like, for
Yeah.
instance, figure 4 is Small Area Plan 1, which the Fredericksburg Planning Commission has been working on.
Right, it's just showing that they're.
Yeah. The path would
Someone else
utilize
doing that.
design recommendations from the pipeline study across Route 3. So basically what they're saying is you already have these projects and studies on the books, and that in their recommendations for the shared use path crossing, they're taking those designs into consideration. They're not necessarily proposing that. They're just saying, hey, you've already kind of put this into motion to a lesser extent. We're going to adopt that. We're not going to just ignore that that doesn't exist. We're going to take that into consideration for our proposals. So,
So is this project part of the public comment period?
I mean, yeah, if you wish to make a comment on it, absolutely.
And what is the
I
end?
don't like it. That's my comment.
I mean,
Write it to me in an email, please.
yeah.
I would appreciate you sending me an email.
When does public comment end for this? It's 60 days, but it started,
Date of the November meeting.
that was right after Thanksgiving. So
Yeah.
sometime around the end of this month. Then
Yeah,
would
it's gonna be
the
it.
end. So it's coming up.
There was mention in the materials, the bridge crossing working group. What does that comprise?
The bridge, like the Stafford, Fredericksburg River Crossing Study Group. Is that the question that you're asking?
Group is what the expression was used in the report.
I'm guessing
And
it,
which,
I don't
not for this report, that's a separate process. I mean, I understand there's like 2 river crossing discussions going on in like 2 different projects right now, but the East-West Working Group,
When I was reading the materials, that you sent
Mhm.
regarding the bridge crossing project, it was mentioned that there was a working group, River Bridge Working Group.
yes.
I was curious to know what members, who constituted the member, who's on the group.
my
Okay.
assumption is.
That's for the river crossing, not this study, correct? I just want to make that clear. That for this study, that's not a part of that group in that study. Now, they're going to be very similar members, but for the Fredericksburg, Stafford County River Crossing study that they've requested FAMPO done, you have staff members from Spotsylvania, City of Fredericksburg, and Stafford.
Planning staff members?
Yes, as well as some members of the easement holders for the river group that are required by the easement to be a part of the process. So basically, right now, it's local jurisdiction staff members and
East-West holders for the river group, what's that mean?
so the
Easement.
easement.
Yeah.
So yeah, sorry.
Oh, easement holders, okay.
Like how the city owns the actual parcels
Yeah,
along the
but
river. Yeah.
They do, as well as those other groups like the Virginia Outdoor Foundation and like the Northern Virginia Conservation Trust and the other folks who basically hold easements that in that easement, for example, in the Fredericksburg easement, it says a river crossing is allowed. Virginia Outdoor Foundation holds, is kind of basically their advocate partner, and so that they have to be brought in on any planning that would be considered an action. So.
But not Friends of the Rappahannock? They weren't part of the group?
No.
All groups, the Friends of the Rappahannock wasn't part of a group that was going to study a bridge within a stone's throw of their offices on the Rappahannock.
I guess because they're not an
Yeah.
easement holder.
They're not an easement holder for this area, no.
Right.
They're not what?
They don't hold an easement along the river. So right now it's just a working group. So it'll be staff that's like outlining what do we need to study.
You got to hold an easement before you can be a part of the discussion. I think that's a pretty poor standard myself. I think the Friends of the Rappahannock got a lot invested in the river, and I'm surprised that they weren't included.
I mean,
They're not because they don't hold an easement, so we're good.
well, within this,
All right.
actually, to give you a good example, within this working group is literally identify who own or holds our own easements in the area. So it's literally us saying, who do we need to include? And that's what the working group is there for. But at this point in time, it's just local staff on that group.
Okay.
Mhm.
Yep.
Are we done? Are we done with each
What
one?
I was
Yep.
talking about, putting your priorities on the economics and not putting any value of history or the environment or losing a river or losing some historical artifact or anything like that.
We're not
It's-
into the river.
It's amazing how this keeps coming up, one of a big example was the study we did. I'm going to say we did, study that the state did on the railroad between here and DC. one of the options that was proposed back in the 70s was to have an alternate route going up the 301 corridor, which would avoid the Capitol so that you would eliminate the danger of having someone bringing a bomb in on a train right under the Capitol building. And how much value did they put on that? What value do you attribute to protecting the Capitol from nuclear bomb? Zero. That's doing the same thing here.
We're still talking about FAMPO, right? Region.
Are we ready to talk about CMAC yet? Okay, let's move on to.
So, FAMPO is congestion mitigation, air quality, and surface transportation block grant funds in a competitive process for our member jurisdictions to submit projects to be considered for rounds of funding. Currently, we are in the fiscal year 28, 29, I believe. The rounds of scoring. If not, it's 27, 28. I'm sorry, my previous MPO was like 1 year off, and so I keep getting it reversed. But if I'm wrong, I'll try to correct that. In any case, I believe, let's see, Spotsylvania County submitted, I think 9 total projects. Jurisdictions can submit projects that score in both CMAC and STBG, as well as that are only qualified in one. The city of Fredericksburg submitted a significant amount. Fredericksburg Go is also an eligible entity for these funds, and they submitted, I think, 5 projects total. And then Stafford County submitted 4 projects that were dual eligible in each one. They can range in any mode. So you can put in for roadway projects, interchange, or intersection improvements is a common one. You can submit for transit projects, which includes new vehicle replacements, or in this case, like the Stafford Transit Center would be an eligible one. And active transportation projects are eligible, so bike paths, as long as they serve a transportation function. So recreational trails aren't in, but as long as it has a transportation function, you can put in for a greenway or a multi-use path or bike lanes and so forth. The only restriction is that there is one element of active transportation that can only be within the transportation management area in northern Stafford, so only projects in that area are eligible for those funds. It's a small little set aside. It's 15% of STBG for those projects, as well as planning studies are eligible. You can't do planning studies for CMAC, but you can do it for STBG. So during the last TAC, FAMPO produced its first rounds of scoring for the projects that were submitted. So in this round for CMAC, Spotsylvania County submitted a small section of the exit 126 interchange at Route 1, as well as a intersection reconfiguration and jug handle, as we say, for South Point Parkway there. Stafford submitted US 1 in Lay Hill, as well as Leland Road, two-way left turn option. And then Route 624 had a two-way left turn option as well. And we've produced the draft scoring. So although these are preliminarily scoring, there could still be movement, so it's not adopted yet. And through the next couple of months, you'll see this come before the TAC as well as the policy committee. And ultimately, the policy committee will choose which projects it wishes to fund and move forward and allocate funding for this in the future. So these were the roadway projects submitted. We can go to the next slide. Transit projects included the transit hub in Stafford, vehicle replacement, as well as the development and capital and some operating expenditures for the Route 217 bus line proposed in Spotsylvania County. Next slide. We had a fair amount of active transportations, but they included an extension of the Bankside Trail in Fredericksburg to go under the Chatham Bridge to the library, as well as the Gateway Shared Use Plan, VCR trail bridges. So if you've been following along with some of the other VCR works, those were submitted by the city. Stafford County submitted sidewalks along a portion of Route 17 that currently does not have sidewalks, but if you go into Google Maps, it's near Powell Street, I think Powell Street. You can see that it's a fairly frequent used corridor because there's several amounts of goat paths that are kind of there. There's the shared use path kind of in Central Park was submitted. The VCR trail in Spotsylvania. Spotsylvania had two projects that were kind of very small segments, kind of along that same area. The VCR spur and the Salem Church Road, Harrison Road. They're kind of trying to connect two different parcel or two different kind of pedestrian networks, so they're much smaller projects. Those were submitted. Next slide. Likewise, so a lot of the projects that I've kind of mentioned a little bit were eligible for CMAQ. Some others are only eligible for surface transportation block grants. So in this case, you see Spotsylvania actually is asking for preliminary engineering funds for I-95 expansion, basically to exit 126, kind of continue on the 95 expansion. The two-way left turns are also requested. George Hanover, Little Page, and Kenmore Street intersection improvements in the city, as well as Wicklow Drive, were requested. Although Wicklow Drive does have a lot more pedestrian infrastructure, it just was not eligible for the active transportation, but was eligible for a roadway because it had roadway elements that could be considered. So that was submitted in that category. Next slide. You have various amounts of transit amenities throughout the network, as well as vehicle replacement submitted by Fredericksburg Go. Next slide. And several studies proposed by the various jurisdictions. So again, the Harrison Road 4-lane option was submitted by Spotsylvania. High capacity transportation service was submitted by Fredericksburg Go to kind of build off of the recommendations made in the transit report of the East-West study. Fredericksburg's exploring or asking to explore ADA connectivity to the VCR trail, as well as the William Street options. So FAMPO also includes a more of an engineering study that was for the river crossing. However, FAMPO does not score its own potential projects or requests. We can just produce those to the policy committee for consideration, but those are not technically scored. So, and finally, next slide, we have ineligible projects. Stafford put the US 17 sidewalks as consideration. Unfortunately, it's not within that 1 mile buffer kind of in the Garrisonville area down to about the courthouse, so it was not eligible for those funds. Next slide. So the next step is that we are going to continue to refine the scoring. So there's going to be a little bit of movement within those. This is the opportunity to kind of just make sure that we are counting every single weird little decimal point possible. We're going to receive the exact budget from VDOT in the coming months, and then we're going to begin draft allocations and identify eligible projects. So right now, our current policy is that we have to go through current existing projects, backfill them. So if they are basically still in need of money that they've requested, we have to fund those first, and then we can go into new projects that they've submitted here. So we'll be going through that process. And then once we've identified that, we'll have a better idea of what our funding availability is. We're estimating that we have about $10 to $12 million in total funds. We don't know exactly how much money existing projects are going to need. They can vary significantly. It kind of depends on what the localities want to kind of use funds. If those are going to be a higher priority than new projects, they can definitely request for us to fill those first. If they want to speed it up, they don't have to. A lot of kind of very minor rules of how they have to go about that process. But by that point in time, we're looking to approve allocations and identify the projects and submit this by June. So those are the new projects that the localities have submitted for this funding round. If you have any questions, please let me know. So.
Questions now.
Okay.
Okay. FAMPO 2023 task and outlook.
Well, TAC and Policy Committee updates first. Print.
So
I will.
I tried to skip ahead.
Yeah.
No,
I will be quick.
give me the tag.
Okay. First up, the Policy Committee approved the East-West Mobility study transit report, so it's an official FAMPO document. We provided actually, you saw the scoring before they did. We provided an update of which projects were submitted to the policy committee back in November. So we knew what projects were submitted. Now we know kind of the scoring is, so you're actually getting insider information for all. And they were provided the East-West mobility study that you saw tonight. So that was the big items from the last policy committee meeting. For the TAC, Nick Ruiz provided an update on the VRE system and their 2050 plan update. They're kind of wrapping up phase 1. A key component of this is that they're doing a pretty significant market analysis and operations of how VRE service has changed since 2020. They're seeing data that VRE has been the slowest of the public transit providers that, as far as returning to pre-COVID ridership. They are still 30 to 45% down. The largest key factor that they're kind of slowly trying to tease out is telecommute options, particularly for federal employees, because they have a very high percentage of federal employees in their ridership. So as federal telework policies evolve, they're seeing a direct relationship to that. In addition, they're also seeing that the different VRE lines are recovering at different rates. So Fredericksburg and Spotsylvania are recovering much faster than the Manassas lines. Another pattern that VRE is seeing is that their trips are actually getting a little bit longer in the AM, but they're starting to have more trips in the PM hours. And so they've been doing a fairly deep dive into their market analysis there, and they're going to continue with their system plan 2050 update. So if you're interested in the VRE, keep an eye on that. TAC also received a very quick update on the East-West roadway survey as well. They actually, you actually saw the same CMAQ STVG update as they did earlier last week. There was also a VDOT State Trails update looking at the Transportation Alternatives Program. This is about a $2 million a year per fiscal cycle in the area, or should be a $2.2 million available for each district. Sorry. So in theory, our region would be eligible for up to $2 million. In the previous round, we were not awarded any of that funding. I think we lost points because you have to be active in it. Otherwise, the next cycle you would potentially lose points, but we will no longer be at that deficit in the last one. And so applications for the next round on the portal should open in May for a July 1 pre-application deadline.
What type of projects qualify?
So transportation alternative projects are particularly bike ped projects. For this, it would be the State Trails project update. A lot of different jurisdictions and do it a little bit differently. In my previous role as an MPO, RTAP, and STBG were basically tied together. Here, they are a completely separate process. And also, Northern Stafford has their own little small allotment that they are able to tap into. It's about $177,000. So it's another just a competitive project grant funding program. So
I was just curious if it had to be, say, a standalone trail, or if it could be, like a shared use path that's along the side of a highway.
It absolutely
could be both. Okay.
I don't know kind of Virginia State Trails prioritization process, because that would be kind of how they score and determine things be different from my previous experiences. So.
Okay.
So, and finally, OIP, one of those Virginia departments, that's the Office of Intermodal Planning and Investment, is developing their midterm needs and priorities. So this is one of the items that helps develop what priorities are within the state and in the region. They did a workshop in 2019. They're still working on it, but they're going to be doing their 2023 regional workshops. The big update, and this is actually something that FAMPO pushed, was that to update truck flow commodity, truck delays, and other freight-related measures. So FAMPO is traditionally the heaviest impacted MPO for freight travel. And so we're saying we really want you to go back and kind of rework some of your stuff, because we're kind of at a disadvantage at the current way that they're doing it. So that does the TAC and Policy Committee updates. Would you like to go into the next item.
Please do.
Okay, future 2023 tasks. I want to update everybody that FAMPO is wrapping up some major projects as far as the East-West study, the Freight Summit study. We are going to be receiving our smart scale results fairly soon, and the King George Courthouse area bike and pedestrian plan is slowly coming to conclusion. So we're actually closing out several major projects. But in 2023, we're going to be doing a couple other major ones. So we have the 2024-2027 Transportation Improvement Project Update. This is the big NPO where we list every single transportation plan in the next upcoming years. It's going to be in that with the dedicated funding. We're going to be looking at river crossing studies. We're going to be addressing our congestion policy. So that's something that's building up. Is it a question that we just expand keep continuing expanding roadways, or is it that we look at other options and methods? So it's going to say, what is our goals to solve congestion option? We have the 2024 UPWP, this is a planning work program that's going to be coming up shortly. We'll have the TAP funding that you just heard with the state trails coming up. We'll be updating our transportation demand model with the new census information, looking at how the transportation managed areas and the urban areas are going to adjust. So that's going to change some inner workings within FAMPO. And we have a fair amount of work happening in our rural work program, the 301 bridge opening and the Barnesville Park access, as well as the Caroline County Comprehensive Plan Transportation chapter. The question before the CTAC is there anything else we should add to this list?
Not expansive enough already?
Yeah.
Does anybody have anything that they want to flag for this? Also something that I'm sure that people can bring back to the February meeting.
Absolutely. I know I ran through that quickly, but
come up with something real quick.
Yeah.
All right, great.
If you want to explore congestion pricing, this would be the time to.
Oh, boy.
No, but I'm like, Lily, tell us what you want us to kind of start poking.
Okay. 10A, the VDOT reported problem. I do have something for this, but I want to give everybody else a chance to go first. Okay, so one of the things I've been noticing, I've noticed this for a while, but I figured I'd bring it up now. We do have some signage issues in the region, mainly as it pertains to business routes and bypasses and alternate routes, things like that. This is something I see more often, say at the Falmouth Bridge, or especially along Tidewater Trail, coming in and out of the city and that part of the city there. It's a lot of mislabeling right now. So for instance, if you're on the Falmouth Bridge going south into town, there's a very old sign that you see that tells you to stay on Route 1, you turn left onto Princess Anne. And to get on Alt 1, which isn't a road that exists in the VDOT register, you stay straight on Emancipation Highway. It also says that for that, you're also going to be on Route 17, which is now actually over on Interstate 95. On Tidewater Trail, there's a lot of missed signage there as well. It shows it as the primary Route 17 in addition to Route 2, which it also is. It does not show it as a business route. I've even seen a few signs that show it as Business 2, which is also not a thing. So there definitely is some signage issues with that. It leads me to one of two different things. Either one, we certainly need to fix that because, you know, it's the wrong information that we have out there and it's been like that for a very long time. Or two, you know, is this something where we kind of like start unraveling threads here? And, you know, I think this becomes an issue for maybe like the Commonwealth Transportation Board, where can we look towards getting rid of business routes? Because business route made perfect sense back in the 1950s when you didn't have GPS and, you know, you're going down the road, and if you are trying to do a long distance traveling and you know you need to stop for gas or food, you would take the business route. If you're gonna go past this town, you take the bypass. There is no need to have two different Route 17s anymore. So that's one of the things that I was thinking about. At the very least, we should fix the signage. If we want to do more, maybe we can look into that. But that's just my opinion. I don't know what anybody else thinks. Rupert?
Do you report these?
No, I didn't. But I'm bringing that up right now.
Right now.
Yeah.
Who's reporting it?
Site, the VDOT site.
Well, no, but this was something I'm bringing up for discussion right now, because it had the extra component to that, where it's like, yeah, we should fix the signage, but I'm wondering, is this something that needs to be, do we actually talk about this? Do we need a business one that goes into downtown when we already have Route 1 that is on Patriot Highway? And
I'd like to know where the business is. Every time I take a trip, road trip or holiday,
Mhm.
I'd like to know which the business one is, because I always take the business.
Okay. I think at this point, most people, I would say, have the GPS, and if they want to find the business, they'll take whatever the route is to get to the business. And so I worry about confusion where, like we're in the transportation, that's why we're part of CTAC, but there are plenty of people that they see two different Route 1s and they don't really think much about which one is the primary Route 1 and which one is business one.
Some people like the circle.
Anybody with half a brain knows the difference. I think you're.
All right, I'm just
I think
saying.
it's a bad idea to be using your GPS while you're driving, personally.
Okay, we get.
All right, so, first off, the sign on the south side of Falmouth Bridge, I've never even seen that. I've lived here for quite a while, so that's a pretty good eye.
It's the big one that's above the intersection, right as you get into the intersection.
So replacing that makes sense. Because,
Yeah.
But it does beg the question, is having or keeping these roadways named business or whatever, it seems innocuous, should just leave it alone? Or does it cause confusion?
And that's why I was bringing up as sort of like a discussion in this, just because to me, I can see how people would get confused on this. And if it had its own unique identifier, then you wouldn't have, okay, is this one or is this one? Is this 17 or is this 17?
Okay.
So that was something I was bringing up. I'm not saying that I'm right. I'm just saying that
It might be worth something. If it does cause confusion, and is the juice worth the squeeze to
yes,
change it and things like that.
some of them are a little bit easier, like with Business 17. For the most part, as you go up Tidewater Trail, it's also Route 2. It's not like it doesn't have a designation already for a good portion of that. But for instance, with Business 1, as it goes down Lafayette Boulevard, it's essentially an extension of 208. Why can't it just be 208?
True. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, like it is.
As someone with
That's the argument.
as
Some
someone
people
with a
like it.
quarter of a brain. Hi, sorry, Nick Kwatnowski came in late.
Go ahead.
As someone with like maybe a quarter of a brain, I'll say when I moved here, I was very confused by the difference between business and regular routes. I learned tonight what the purpose of the business was. So I think there is some merit to this conversation.
Hey.
This is Dave McLaughlin. I agree with you. There's merit to the discussion. Perhaps we could have someone from VDOT. I mean, this is business routes and alternate routes. That's nationwide. That's just a local problem. Some of the signage might be wrong too.
Yeah.
But we could discuss with them. They could give us their insight as professionals. It would probably be an interesting discussion.
Did we have VDOT coming in for something else? I vaguely remember. I think we had made
all variable speed limit thing.
Oh, but we already got the answer for that. Okay. We could. Was someone else making comments? Sorry.
Did I miss item 10A on the agenda?
We're on that right now. So it was my reporter problem, but I was using it as a chance to talk about the
Hearing is so bad, I'm not sure. Okay.
Yeah, just because it was a problem that I saw, and then I was just saying like, well, is it part of indicative of something bigger? Yeah. So I might be kind of fudging the agenda just a little bit. Well, that would be great if there was somebody that wanted, a whole trip to CTAC, just for this seems like a lot. So maybe someone could just call in or something,
How do people know where the businesses are?
Your phone.
Nice question. One of my hobbies is to go explore and see iron front buildings, cast iron fronts. And we've only got one in Fredericksburg, the old Freelance Star building. But almost every old town in south, and probably the north too, has got at least one or two cast iron front buildings. I think it's fun to see those, and
And you'll find them on the business route.
sure, on the business route, so I looked at the business route.
That's a thing.
Okay.
Call it the cast iron.
So regarding the report of problem, finally noticed one to report.
Yes.
November the 30th, I reported to VDOT that they had forgotten one of their signs, that they portable signs, big orange diamond-shaped sign that you unfold. They put one of these up to do a project over on Anderson Drive off Route 3. And when the project was finished, they forgot it and left it. Stayed there for, best part of a week. So I submitted, I went online, submitted the information that they asked for. And next time I went by, it was gone.
Okay.
Hey,
So
Problem solved.
Difference made.
it's kind of anticlimactic, but you were interested. You were interested in these reports, so
Thank you, Rupert.
pass it on.
Does anybody else have anything that they have reported to VDOT or they would like to report to VDOT? Okay. Any other member reports, topics of interest, informational items from anyone?
There is one thing that I thought the committee should know about if you missed it. It was in the news some months ago that in California, I can't recall whether it was a jurisdiction or whether it was statewide, they're now paying people not to buy a car. I think it's $1,000. Did you see the story?
Oh.
And the reason I'm mentioning this is not because I think that we should start paying people not to buy a car around here, but it's because I think I see a little light at the end of the tunnel in that they're doing something that I've been hammering at for decades, and that is they're trying to address the demand for the roads instead of what we've been doing for the past 60 years is keep increasing the supply of the roads. I personally like congestion pricing better, but the important part is somebody out there is thinking in terms of trying to reduce the demand. So maybe this will start the ball rolling. That's all.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay, we've reached public comment number 2. Anybody else from the public want to provide a public comment?
Question. What I heard tonight, maybe I'm confused. Seems to me when multiple studies, they should get together and try to figure common problem or solution. On the renderings, I don't believe this is intended. It appears that the only crossing being studied is coming off of Delray Parkway. He had a presentation at L Lodge, and part of that, and the residents went absolutely nuts. Very opposed to this, and when you have your meeting on the 23rd, you're going to go out in the street. But I heard tonight that there's a separate study looking at each. And it would seem to me that, okay, doing that, that input has to go in priority on the east-west mobility study, does it not?
So the two different studies kind of developed independently. So the east-west mobility study occurred, and this is before my time here, so you can fault me for being new, but basically almost 2 years before, or maybe a year before this started.
Point of order.
Yeah, go ahead. I know it's a public
Oh,
comment,
okay.
right?
That's fine.
I saw you.
Please let us answer your question.
Right.
We can do that, but as part of this formal meeting, on back.
I was assuming there was no more public comment, but I did not ask if there was any more public
Yeah,
comment. So
okay.
is there,
To answer your question, discuss that.
all right, is there any other public comment, whether online or in person? Okay, public comment is closed.
I move for adjournment.
It would be good if we could just get this one question answered, just because somebody from the public is here and John was already,
Informally after the meeting, we're glad to talk.
okay. That's fair. That's fair. Well, is there any future agenda items? We do have that on the agenda. Anybody, any other future agenda items? Okay. There was a motion for adjournment. Is there a second?
Second.
All right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right.
And I'll stick around and answer any questions.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's now.
Yes, absolutely.